The first time I saw her, Princess Valera was laughing. Not at a joke. At me. I stood in the center of her family's great hall, a room built from a crystal that hummed faintly with light, tall enough to swallow 10 of my old apartment buildings. Around me sat the nobles of her house, watching with the same amused curiosity you might give a dog that had learned to stand on 2 legs. "You'll never win, human," she said, stepping down from her platform. Her voice carried through the hall without her even raising it. The room was built to make sure everyone heard the person in charge. "But I admire that you tried." I said nothing. I had learned, over the past year of living among her people, that silence made them uncomfortable. They were used to being answered quickly. Humans, when we wanted to, could wait. She was beautiful, in the way her species always was. Tall, silver-skinned, eyes like liquid gold. She was also, I would learn very soon, about to make the biggest mistake of her short political career. It started with an insult, as these things often do. Her house, the Vey dynasty, had hosted a diplomatic banquet for the newly arrived human delegation, my delegation. Over dinner, one of her cousins had asked, half joking, whether humans had any traditions of honor or challenge, or whether we simply fought like animals until one side stopped moving. I had smiled and said that we did have such traditions, very old ones. Older, in fact, than her entire star system's recorded history. She had laughed at that too. And then, because pride is the same poison in every species, she challenged me. "Then let us test this human honor," she said, raising her glass. "A formal trial, my house against yours. If you win, I will personally sponsor your delegation before the Central Assembly. If you lose," she smiled, "you will kneel before this court, and your people's application for full trade rights will be withdrawn for 1 full cycle." The room went quiet. A cycle was roughly 4 Earth years. For a species trying to establish itself among the stars, 4 years of isolation could mean falling permanently behind. I should have said no. I should have let a trained diplomat handle it. Instead, I said, "Name the trial." She chose something called the Trial of the Unbroken Line. I did not know what that meant. Neither did anyone on my delegation. We spent that night searching every database we had access to, and found almost nothing, only that it was ancient, rarely used, and considered among her people to be the purest test of will in the galaxy. The rules, once explained to me by a bored court official the next morning, were simple enough to describe and brutal enough to attempt. 2 competitors would sit across from each other at a long crystal table. Between them would be a shared board, similar to a strategy game, where each move required calculation, patience, and the willingness to sacrifice pieces for long-term position. But that was only half of it. The other half was endurance. Neither competitor could leave their seat. Neither could eat, sleep, or receive outside help. Water was allowed, nothing else. The trial ended only when one side resigned, made an illegal move out of exhaustion, or the board reached its natural conclusion. Most trials, the official told me with a small, superior smile, lasted 6 to 10 hours. Her species considered that the outer limit of what any reasonable mind could endure while thinking clearly. I asked him what the record was. 14 hours, he said, held by Valera's grandmother. No one has come close since. I nodded slowly, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear, but a strange, quiet calm. I thought about long nights standing watch on cold borders back home. I thought about exams that ran until dawn, about shifts at hospitals that stretched past 30 hours, about the countless small, unglamorous ways humans had learned to simply keep going, long after our bodies begged us to stop. She did not know any of that. Her people had only ever seen the polished version of us, the diplomats in clean suits, the smiling scientists, the careful, rehearsed first contact footage. They had never seen what humanity looked like when it decided not to quit. She was about to. The trial began 3 days later, in front of the entire court. They carried in the crystal table and set 2 chairs on opposite sides. Valera sat first, arranging herself with practiced elegance, her golden eyes already gleaming with the confidence of someone who has never truly lost anything in her life. I sat across from her, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. "Last chance to withdraw, human," she said softly. "Just for me. There is no shame in recognizing you are outmatched." "I appreciate the offer," I said. "I'll pass." The board between us lit up, dividing into a grid of shifting hexagons, each one capable of holding a piece that could move, combine, or vanish, depending on rules I was still learning in real time. It was, I would realize hours later, a game designed to punish impatience. Every aggressive move opened a weakness. Every clever trick could be turned back on you 3 moves later. It rewarded exactly one quality above all others: the willingness to wait longer than your opponent. The first 2 hours were almost pleasant. We probed each other's strategies, tested small advances, retreated when needed. She played beautifully, I'll admit that. Her mind moved in elegant, spiraling patterns, always 3 steps ahead of where I expected her to be. By hour 4, the crowd's whispers had died down into a heavier kind of silence. Court officials brought her water. I drank mine slowly, rationing it without really deciding to. Some old instinct from field training kicking in without my permission. By hour 6, she was still smiling, but it had become thinner, more effortful. "You should be tired," she said, studying the board rather than me. "I am," I admitted. "Then why do you not show it?" I thought about that question for a long moment before answering honestly. "Because showing it doesn't help me win." Something flickered behind her eyes then. Not quite doubt, but the first crack in something that had never been tested before. By hour 8, we had passed her grandmother's old record without either of us mentioning it. The court had gone completely silent. I could feel the exhaustion pulling at every part of me, my vision blurring slightly at the edges, my hands feeling strangely distant from my own arms. But I had felt this before. Not in a game. In worse places, for worse reasons. This, at least, didn't hurt anyone. Valera's movements had slowed. Her elegant spirals had become straighter, more desperate, patterns of someone trying to force an ending, rather than earn one. She made a move that opened her whole eastern flank, something she never would have allowed herself in the first hour. I saw it. I almost took it. I didn't. Instead, I made a smaller, quieter move, one that closed off her mistake without punishing her for it, forcing the game back into balance instead of ending it early. I heard a soft, confused murmur ripple through the watching nobles. It wasn't the move a predator makes. It wasn't the move meant to end things quickly. It was the move of someone who was not, in fact, trying to win as fast as possible. I was trying to outlast her. By hour 10, an official leaned toward Valera and whispered something urgent. She waved him off without looking up, her jaw tight. Sweat. Actual sweat. Something I hadn't expected her species to produce, beating faintly along her hairline. "You should be broken by now," she said, her voice rougher than before. "Your kind is fragile, short-lived. This should be far beyond you." I managed a small, tired smile. "You've only ever met the version of us we choose to show you at dinner parties," I said. "Polite, calm, reasonable. That's not fragility, princess. That's restraint." She frowned, genuinely confused now beneath the exhaustion. "Restraint from what?" I didn't answer right away. I moved a piece instead, closing another gap she hadn't noticed opening. Then quietly, I said, "From showing you what we're actually capable of enduring when we have no other choice." By hour 12, her hands had begun to tremble slightly over the board. Mine had too, if I'm honest. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, something I could feel even through my own fog of exhaustion. The nobles were no longer watching with amusement. They were watching the way you watch a storm you had been told your whole life could never actually reach your shores, and now saw gathering right outside your window. An older advisor, someone who had been quiet the entire trial, finally leaned close to Valera and spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Princess," he said carefully, "the historical archives on Earth's own past, the ones your grandmother once studied, before choosing to seal them from public record, perhaps now is the time to recall why she made that choice." Valera's eyes flicked up to him, then back to me, something like real fear finally entering them for the first time. "What is he talking about?" I met her gaze steadily. "Ask him later," I said. "Right now, it's still your move." She played on. Of course she did. Pride doesn't disappear just because fear arrives. It simply learns to sit beside it. By hour 14, we had matched her grandmother's legendary record, exactly. The hall was utterly silent, except for the faint hum of the crystal table and the sound of our own breathing. By hour 15, something in her broke. Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, the way real endurance always ends. Her hand hovered over a piece, shaking slightly, and then simply stopped. She stared at the board for a long, long moment. "I don't understand," she said, and for the first time since I had met her, she sounded genuinely young, genuinely uncertain. "You should have failed hours ago. Every calculation said so. Every calculation you had access to," I said gently, "was based on what we let you see. You never asked what happens to a species that survives ice ages, plagues, and its own worst mistakes, over and over, for 100,000 years, and still chooses, every single time, to keep going." I paused, letting that settle, then added quietly, "We didn't come to your stars because we were desperate, Princess. We came because we were finally ready to stop merely surviving and start choosing what came next." She looked at the board one final time, then carefully, deliberately, laid her hand flat upon it, the formal gesture of resignation. "I concede," she said softly. The words seemed to cost her something real. The hall erupted into stunned, hushed conversation, but I barely heard it. I was too tired, too focused on simply staying upright in my chair, on not letting 15 hours of held-together composure collapse now, in front of everyone. Valera rose slowly from her seat, unsteady, and for a moment, I thought she might simply walk away without another word. Instead, she paused, looking down at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not arrogance, not amusement, but something closer to respect, still uncertain of its own shape. "What do you actually want?" she asked quietly, the challenge gone completely from her voice. "Your people. What is it you're truly here for?" I thought about the question honestly before answering, too exhausted for anything but the truth. "Peace, if you're willing to offer it fairly," I said. "We've spent long enough proving what we can endure. We'd rather spend what comes next, proving what we can build." She was quiet for a long moment, studying me the way you might study someone you had badly misjudged. "You could have embarrassed me in front of my entire court," she finally said. "Ended it early, made an example of me, the way I intended to make an example of you." "I know," I said simply. "Why didn't you?" I managed a tired, honest smile. "Because that's not actually what strength is for." She didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure, even now, that she needed one. As the court slowly began filing out around us, still whispering, still stealing uncertain glances my way, I sat back in my chair and finally allowed myself to feel exactly as exhausted as I truly was. Somewhere far behind me, I heard one of the younger nobles murmur to another, voice hushed with something between awe and unease. "She said he'd never win." His companion answered quietly, "No. She said he'd never win. She never once considered that he wasn't trying to win at all. He was simply waiting for her to stop." I closed my eyes, and for the first time since arriving among the stars, I allowed myself something dangerously close to hope.